Good afternoon and welcome everyone. I hope you can hear me. Please give me a thumbs up if everything is in order. Hi Massimo. We're going to wait for 2 more minutes before we start. So bear with me. Okay. So as I was saying, good afternoon and welcome everyone to this lunch webinar on citizen science for and with schools. My name is Luisa Mitrake and I'm a citizen science coordinator for the Africa Museum. You see it here in my background. The Africa Museum is a museum and also a research center on Africa, with a particular focus on Central Africa. It is situated in Tervuren, near Brussels. So we are in Belgium. So today's webinar is the first of a series of lunch talks on participatory research in all its forms. And we will look specifically at citizen science with and for schools. I will welcome today's 2 speakers. We have Mette Fentz Haastrup. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly.
So
from joining us from Odense in Denmark. Mette is a high school coordinator at the University of Southern Denmark, working for the Citizen Science Knowledge Center there. And she's also a former teacher. She will talk about the project Our History, a Danish citizen science project with schools. Thank you for joining, Mette.
Thank you.
Nice to have you. And we also welcome Dr. Steven Caluwaerts. Steven is a researcher in atmospheric physics at the University of Ghent, and also working on modeling for the Royal Meteorological Institute of Belgium here in Brussels. Thank you for joining, Steven. We start, let me give you some information, practical information about the session. The webinar is recorded, as you can see, and will be shared afterwards. During the presentations, feel free to add your questions to the chat, which is open, or you can ask them live directly after the 2 presentations. Your microphone is muted for the moment, but after the presentations, if you want to ask questions, of course, it will be unmuted. So that being said, I wish you a pleasant webinar and see you in 20 minutes. And I will give the floor to Mette now.
Yeah, thank you. As Luisa said, I will present our project called Our History. It's a research project and science education, citizen science education program at high schools. First, I will just explain how we at STU see or understand citizen science. Citizen science can be understood in different ways. In Denmark, citizen science is often used to data collecting and mapping of wildlife, but at STU we see citizen science as more than that. We see citizen science as a method for interacting and dialogue between citizens and researchers, thereby reducing the distance between them and to enhance debate based on knowledge and fact instead of fake news and personal opinions. Citizen science is also about engaging citizens in research and innovation, and through dialogue and interaction, gaining new insights for both citizens and the researchers, and thereby enrich research as well as enhance the implementation of new knowledge in society. So, and I would like to stress that this is not our definition, but it's our understanding. And then just shortly about our history, the research part. The PI is a professor named Claus Petersen. He does research on welfare, the Danish welfare state, and his co-PI is an assistant professor, Cecilie Bjerre, who also focuses on the welfare state. And the aim of this research project is to investigate how ordinary people experienced the societal changes in Denmark in the 60s and 70s. So when women joined the labor market, the welfare state expanded and people discussed the gender roles and etc. And they want to collect 1,000 interviews. And to do so, we use a citizen science approach, which is based on formal learning at high schools. We have co-created an education program for history and made an online platform with learning materials. And we, before this is running at the schools, we have a masterclass for the teachers. And then when the schools are doing it as a course, they have a 10 weeks flexible lesson plan, which is curriculum based in class. And the students are learning about the topics and they get skills. They learn about the methods, how to interview and how to upload and how to, in the end, disseminate their own findings on a scientific poster. And then this poster session, it's actually a competition where they, as I said, disseminates their own findings for a jury, which consists of the researchers and their colleagues. And so far we have 3 pilots. So it's really perhaps not really pilots, but we have done it 3 times with 44 classes from 7 high schools. The research have already got more than 250 interviews, and they have approved the data quality, and they have seen more than 300 posters. And in the future, we will run it for 4 years more, and we will, in the next 4 years, get 100 classes engaged, and hopefully the researchers will get these thousands interviews. And then the question is, what is in it for the researchers? They get new qualitative data collection, which is quite unique and very large. The researchers have evaluated this quality and they find the interviews useful. The challenge has been that the students record the interview and upload it to a data archive. So we have university students to transcribe these, so we have text files instead. But because it's in Danish, it takes some time to correct these transcriptions. But we just found a new secure software which actually uses AI, so it does it more correct transcriptions. So we save a lot of time for now. And then we can see the researchers can use this data to supplement and reframe existing research. They can contribute to significant societal questions, and at least interesting, the researchers actually have got new ideas for research areas from the poster sessions. For instance, what did the youngest children do when both mom and dad was working? And We have two posters here. One of them shows that there was a mother working at a pub, and they couldn't leave their children at a daycare, so she brought the children to the pub when she was working. And the other is named Lunchbox Grandma. It's actually about a mother who worked during the night and stayed home with the children. Her husband expected her to do his lunchbox after her night shift until one day she didn't want. She just want to go to bed after her night shift. So he had to do his lunchbox himself. And then there's the last poster called Stupid Dyslexic. Dyslexic. It's actually not really in the scope of the research, but I will name it here, or I will use it here because it actually showed that it was presented by a student which were dyslexic themselves, but they made a really inspiring pitch, and the drawing on the poster is actually one of the students who drew it herself. And according to their teacher, this group did really blossom during this course because it wasn't only about reading and writing, but also doing the interviews and so on. And most of the students actually, they don't have to interview their grandparents, but a lot of them do, and they actually think it's really interesting to hear about their family history. And further, several funds now request involvement of citizen science, and our history just got funded with around 1 million euros, so we can run this for the next 4 years. And then, why engage the high school students? Citizen science offers opportunities for students to engage in authentic investigation, also, which is the aim of science education and also citizen science. And they actually engage in a scientific approach to history and our history, and not just learning about history, which is a huge motivation for both the students, but also for the teachers. And the students, they understand how scientific knowledge develops. And right now we're actually investigating the motivation of the teachers to bring citizen science in the classroom. We have several teachers that have signed up for this year, which have participated since the first pilot. So they actually also see that their students learn more about history, and it qualify the students' historical awareness. And they say that history really becomes alive, and the students understand their own place in history. And this also enhance this intergenerational dialogue. And we can see that the teachers are really engaged in the project, and they actually really do care for the quality of the data. And we have, of course, evaluated each pilot, and a lot of the students stated that they felt that they benefited from their participation in the project, and they were well prepared for performing the interview, and they stated that they gained a high or very high degree of this intergenerational insight. And I've been spoken with a lot of the students. They do this interview in groups, and if they're not interviewing their own grandparents, for example, they actually say that next time I will see my grandma, I will actually ask her how did she experience these changes. So we can actually see that despite that doesn't do it in the class or as a part of this program, they actually take the talk with the grandparents outside of the program. And then I will just mention some other citizen science projects that engage pupils and high school students at STU. We also have a project called Find a Lake, where pupils collect water samples and send it in as research data. And we have another project called Climate Future Fiction, where high school students write cli-fi short stories, which will be research data, and they also analyze these themselves in class, which also will be used for the researchers to do more co-analysis using the students' findings. And I mentioned these because I have only worked with high schools, but I think that if you want to do some more complex data collection, or if your data is quite complex, such as interview, I think it's a good idea to choose to engage high school students because they're older and wiser than school children. So it's easier for them to train them to do this interview, and they do the interview based on a semi-structured interview guide, and they are actually quite comfortable doing this. But pupils or school children are really good for taking a water sample and take some pictures. Or in Denmark, they also have collected small animals to send in and for researchers. But high school students are really good to do these more complex data collections as well, and actually also to analyze it and bring new insights for the researchers. And then I just have this, but it's in Danish, but so you can perhaps see it afterwards. But for now, there's no texts. But just to show you. Oh, sorry. So you can see it, and then you can see how it's that this poster season actually is running. And for the last, I'll just show we have a lot of references, which also some of them are more about what is citizen science, but there's also some about citizen science as used in formal learning. And for now, we're actually at the center during a model for how to engage citizens and science. How to engage high school students in citizen science projects. But it's not really done now. But I will send it later if any of you could use it for your projects.
Thank you very much.
Yep, you're welcome.
Thank you, Mette. And I really liked the insight of the students that history becomes alive through this project.
Yeah.
Hope we'll talk more later about this. Yeah. And now I will give the floor to Steven, and I will share his presentation.
Thank you. So we'll make a big jump from history to atmospheric science, to climate, to weather. And I will, in a nutshell, summarize our experience that we had with citizen science and schools. So we worked together with schools to explore some meteorological observational gaps. And on the next slide, you will see what I mean with this. So at the Royal Meteorological Institute, we are collecting a lot of meteorological observations, but nearly all of these observations are collected in open rural environments. But we see that there is also strong interest in observations in other environments like cities or forests. And the reason for this is, for example, with climate change, that there is more and more importance to understand the impact of heat stress, and cities are on average warmer environments. So we also would like to collect data there. Forests play also an important role when we're talking about climate change. So scientists are looking for data in other environments, but traditionally we never collected data there. And so that's a gap in our knowledge. And to collect these new data sets in different environments, we thought a few years ago that it would be very nice to do this together with schools. So on the next slide, you will see that we started a collaboration with schools. So actually, we gave quite a big responsibility to schools. So we gave them different tasks during this scientific project. So first of all, we asked schools to propose locations. So we were looking for interesting locations in a city center, in a forest, and so on. It's often not so easy to find this kind of locations because you need permission to put a station there. And these schools, they have a very strong local network, of course. So they were very useful to make this exercise, to think and look for interesting locations. Afterwards, we selected the most interesting locations, the most interesting proposals from schools. And then we asked the students of the schools to build the weather stations. So they received a box with solar panels, sensors, batteries, and so on. And then they had to build everything themselves. So here you see some pictures where you see the students building the weather station and also installing the weather station. So you also see that some of the schools decided to put a weather station in a lake, for example, and then that was quite challenging to install it there. After building the stations, we invited the schools and the students to follow up on the measurements. So all the data are in real time available online, so they can have a look at their weather station, their data, and they can compare it with weather stations of other schools in different neighborhoods. So in this way, for example, students can see the difference between, for example, an urban measurement station and a station that is located in a lake or a forest. And so we also proposed them to do some data analysis. And on the next slide, you will see the platform. So I already explained that we have a platform where you can see the data in real time. So we developed a dashboard, and students or anyone who is interested can just select the weather station and see the measurements and can download also the data. So every 5 minutes, temperature, precipitation, pressure, and so on will pop up for each of these locations. And then on the next slide, you will see so we tried to have the schools active also after the installation of the weather station. And to reach that goal, we provided some educational material. So online, we developed some material that was both giving some kind of background about the scientific reasons why we are interested in that kind of data. For example, in this material, we explain why the city has a different microclimate than a forest, for example. But at the same time, the link with the data themselves was also made. So we also had exercises where we asked the students to download data for their station and to do some analysis. So that's one part. So schools can do this on their own. Everything is openly available online. The second interaction with the schools consisted of workshops. So our university students who were studying meteorology or who were doing a thesis on a similar topic, we have sent them to some of these high schools. And there they organized a workshop together with the students. And that was actually very, very successful, because for the high schools, that was a very easy way to do something with the data, because the teacher did not have to prepare a lot. So there was an expert coming to the school who could explain everything and lead the exercise and the data analysis. And at the same time, for our students, it was also a great experience, because many of our master students, they never have the opportunity to get some teaching experience. So some of them might end up as a teacher later, but during their career at university, they actually never have the opportunity to teach. So for some of them, this was really also an eye-opening experience to go to a school and to work for an afternoon with students. So that was a very fruitful collaboration, I would say. Then on the next slide, you will see, let's say, the scientific output of the project. So it's citizen science. So we tried to do some science, some new science. And with the data that we managed to collect, we have investigated, for example, the urban heat island effect for Flanders. So we published some papers with the data, and we're also using this data at the Royal Meteorological Institute to validate very high resolution forecasts, because these observations that we collect, they often have information on a very local scale. So we can use that information as one of the sources to evaluate how well our forecasts are. So this is the science output of the project. On the next slide, I will show you some, and let's make sure that I'm saying the right thing. So on the next slide, I will show you also that this kind of project really brings new opportunities. So Mette in the previous presentation also already mentioned this. If you start with this kind of citizen science projects and with collaborations with schools and other partners, the risk is quite large that you will get new research ideas. And so this also happened to us. And actually this project, this VLINDER project, kicked off some other collaborations and some other research projects. And for example, one example here is that we were asked afterwards by some cities to do observations of greening projects in the city. So many cities in Belgium have projects where they are adding green and blue elements. So they are adding trees, for example, to a square and so on. And through this citizen science project, we got into touch with many of these cities, and now they asked us to measure before and after they make changes in a square, in a street, the impact on temperature and thermal comfort. So that's one example of future collaborations that actually followed based on the citizen science project. Then on the next slide, I already present my conclusion. So as promised, I will keep it short, but this is the most important slide. So we started this project in 2019. So now we are 5 years later. And it's interesting to look back at the previous 5 years. And I think that there are a few interesting conclusions. So first of all, and that's something I really would like to stress, citizen science really creates novel possibilities also for science. So for example, for us, it would never have been possible to install this number of weather stations spread over the country without a collaboration with, in this case, schools. So if you have a challenging research idea, then citizen science or a collaboration with schools might really be a very interesting way to realize your plan. Second conclusion is that schools are very interested in this kind of projects. So the previous speaker also already mentioned that for schools, it's often a very positive experience. We also had the same experience. So schools are very motivated. We had many more candidates than we had weather stations. So there was a strong interest. Of course, this is also related to the societal attention for the topic of climate change. At the time that we launched this project, we also had the climate strikes of our young students. So that was by accident a very, very fortunate timing for us. But certainly teachers were also very interested in doing something with climate and climate researchers. So there is a strong interest at the school side for this kind of project. A third conclusion is that for our proposal, for our project, it was also very useful to have real-time open data, so people could see that something was happening. Schools could have a look at the data. So this also created a lot of other possibilities, and also a lot of, let's say, outreach possibilities. Another very important conclusion for the citizen scientist is that already before you start, you should think about the longer term of your project, because once you start, you are involving many people, many schools, and you need also some kind of exit strategy for your project. And this is something that is often overlooked. And also in our case, of course, we were first thinking about how to get everything started. But time flies, and it's really important also to think about how this project might evolve on the longer term, because that's often very challenging. And typically, you get some project funding, but then to keep things up and running afterwards, that's a big challenge. And then finally, I think it's also important to stress that although it's really very interesting to do, you should not underestimate the capacity that you need in your team if you would like to manage this kind of project with schools. Because on the one hand, you have, of course, the scientific part, but on the other hand, you need some educational expertise in your team. There is a lot of communication that needs to be done. So you really need people with very different backgrounds and interests in your team to get this kind of project up and running and to make it successful. So it's a very interesting experience, but think well before you start, such that you make it a positive experience. Okay, this is what I would like to tell you.
Thank you, Steven, for such an inspiring presentation. What I really like about this project is that it's very educational, of course, for the students, but it also it has an impact, environmental impact, and it deals with societal problems. So it really combines the two very well. I will now invite you to ask your questions to Steven and Mette. I will check the chat to see if there are already questions. Put your hands up, raise your hand, and we will unmute your microphone. There will be a recording shared after the meeting, and the PowerPoint as well, if you agree, Steven and Mette. Don't see any raised hand yet. Yeah, go ahead, Steven.
Yeah, I actually have a question for my colleague, for the first presenter. So Mette, you mentioned at the end of your presentation that you also have a project on this climate fiction. Could you tell me a bit more about this, because this might be very interesting for us at the Royal Meteorological Institute.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so we have three researchers. One is from humanities, and one is from she's actually an innovation professor, and one from biology. And they actually have the high school. It's a course in English at high schools. It's about 6 lessons, and at the first lesson, the students meet up at the university, and they do what is called a flash fiction. So one of the researcher has a few questions. For example, first the students need to name the person in their short story, and then afterwards they just have to write for 2 minutes in hand about who is this person and how is it, where is it living in 2068, I think it is. And then they actually, for 3 questions, actually get a history running, And then afterwards, they have to do this this flash fiction into a short story. So they do it back at the high schools. They with help with some extra questions on how to evaluate, how to expand this flash fiction into a short story. And then they actually write a short story on someone is living on the top of a mountain because they think the water is coming up, and some of this in the stories are going to the moon and lives there because the Earth is not existing anymore, and so on. And then the researchers is actually using these to see how young people think about climate future and climate changes. And then in groups, the students actually analyze in class their classmates' stories, and then actually try to see the patterns. Are they all dystopian, or how do they see the future? And then we meet up again at SCU, and then the researchers has read all stories, and then they actually also have a competition and give a prize to a student from each class, and then we have an overall winner. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
There's a question in the chat from Carol. Can you remind how your projects were funded, please?
So for my project, it received funding from the Flemish administration. So they launched in 2018, I think, for the first time, a citizen science call. So they were looking for projects who involved society in research. And so we applied and we got funding, but actually they repeated this call a few times in more recent years. But it was always, if I compare it with the Danish budget, it was quite limited. So we are talking about 150K to work with. So it was quite limited, and it was also only for new projects.
Yeah, and for our history, the first 3 rounds were actually seed money from SDU. So the center have some money, the Citizen Science Center, and then we asked the Faculty of Humanities to. It was a really small amount they gave, but now this year they got money from a Danish private foundation called Velux. And climate future fiction actually was the same. It's been an intern seed money from STU, but now they also got some money to actually analyze from a Danish foundation, and will go for EU of project or something called Interreg REC. So they are actually looking for international partners to upscale the project, so they can see is does young people in other countries see the climate changes at the same as in Denmark.
Gitte in the chat also gives another option for a climate-related project, Crea Visions, and there's a link there in Aarhus. And I also put a link about the Flemish government AWE calls on citizens, past calls on citizen science projects. Check if there are more questions. I also have one question to you two. How did you select the schools? Yes, how did you publish your call? Did you choose the schools yourself? Was it an open call? Any school could participate? How did it happen?
Should I start? With our history, we actually talked with some schools in our region in the southern Denmark, because we only had 15. We only had room for 15 classes, but right now I'm mailing teachers all over Denmark and their principals, and say they can join if they want.
So we selected the schools based on the quality of the location that they proposed. So we had a look at all the locations that we received. So each school had to propose at least one location, and then we choose the most interesting one. So actually, science played somehow a role in the selection of the schools. And the advertisements to the schools happened via some organizations. For example, the organization for geography teachers was involved in this project. And so they communicated to all their members. So in this way, we reached many or most of the schools. But we also had some kind of press moment at the launch of the project. So this was also in the national news. And then in this way, also schools discovered that they could participate. But in our case, it was a bit a pity because we underestimated, we thought that less schools would react. And so we had too many schools who were interested, and we had to disappoint most of the schools. So that was somehow a bit a pity.
Thank you. A question from Sylvia in the chat. Is your initiative free of cost for the students or schools? How is your selection criteria? So is it free for the schools? And I think, Steven, you talked about your selection criteria.
Yes,
is there a selection?
It was free. So we used the funding to fund all the costs for the material and also the educational part. So everything was free for schools. There was no cost. And so the selection was really done on the diversity of locations. So we try to have, let's say, 1/3 of the locations in city centers, 1/3 in more forest regions and so on. And at the same time, we tried to have a balance between the different provinces. So we didn't want to focus all our stations on the Vlaams-Brabant, so we spread it a bit. And we also tried somehow to take into account that we prefer to have different types of schools. So it was BSO, ISO, TSO, so we had a different types of schools.
Yeah, and for our history, it's also free of cost. They only pay the transportation when they have to go to the poster session. Otherwise, we print the posters.
I also shared a guide by Civil, the Flemish Citizen Science Contact Point Knowledge Center about working with schools and citizen science in the classroom. It is available in Dutch for my Dutch-speaking colleagues. Okay, so I think we've reached our time. Thank you so much, Mette and Steven, for the wonderful presentations, and I hope to hear from you very soon. We wish you all a nice afternoon and nice weekend, and we'll see you again at the next lunch talk of the Africa Museum on participatory research, which will be in April, on a theme as interesting as the one we debated on today. So see you soon. Goodbye.